In working with couples with trauma, especially if an affair has caused trauma, there's one thing that eventually needs to be addressed, and that is the anniversary date of the partner knowing or finding out what happened. Now, this isn't always traumatic for every couple, but for some, it can absolutely cause trauma. Everything in their world gets disoriented, gets turned upside down and inside out. The life and reality they thought they were living, they come to find out that it is not, in fact, the reality they thought they knew. And that kind of disorienting, overwhelming impact can absolutely look like trauma, without question. And so these particular dates that get seared into their memory of when they found out, where they were, what was around them, these can be triggers later for anniversary dates. And as I said, this can be true of really any type of trauma, and it's almost always that it slows down the traumatic memories and it's indelibly etched into the memory of the person when these anniversary dates come along. So today I want to talk about how to handle those anniversary dates. How do we approach them? How best to cope with them? And ultimately, how do we move through them to a better place? Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship. I'm Tom Philp, your host, and as a therapist, I've spent over 10,000 hours helping couples work through their trauma so they can repair ruptures, heal their wounds, and communicate from a place of wholeness and connection. Let's get started. Okay, as I mentioned in the beginning, this certainly, this anniversary dates applies to couples at times where one partner finds out, and it's really kind of finally confirmed that there's been an affair. And although it is not traumatizing to all couples, I've certainly worked with many couples where it's deeply hurtful, but it wasn't such a overwhelming, disorienting kind of response that caused what we would consider to be trauma. But certainly with some couples it is. And there's other types of traumas that can happen. We talk about a rape, or we want to talk about a very abusive episode that might have occurred between a parent and a child, or something along those lines where that particular time event is sort of seared into their memories. And they can remember sort of where they were. And every time that date rolls around, it can become a potential trigger for them. I see this definitely when we start talking about the death of a parent or a loved one or a grandparent. I see this a lot around the holidays when somebody close to you passed away and it was near a holiday. And almost inevitably, when that next holiday rolls around, it sort of casts a shadow over the whole festivities. I know my own father passed away right after Thanksgiving, and although I wouldn't call it a trigger date for me, certainly every time Thanksgiving rolls around, it's, I remember that. I remember it was just a few days after Thanksgiving and he was out on vacation. I remember the hospital we were in when it happened. And so those types of memories can come back. And so what I want to talk about and dive into today, how do we handle that? How do we cope with anniversary dates that we know are coming? Unlike triggers, which are sort of not anticipated, triggers kind of come up on us when we don't expect. But anniversary dates are something that we can anticipate coming. And so that's why I'm not really using the word trigger around them. There's a difference to me between a trigger, which is more sudden, that we didn't see coming, and an anniversary date that can be emotional surrounding some of our trauma. And how do we handle that? If we can anticipate it coming, that's a good thing, actually. So I know there's probably some anxiety and dread about it because we can't anticipate it, but I also think that allows us to empower ourselves to be able to handle and cope with it in proactive ways. So I see the fact that we can anticipate it as a positive thing, not necessarily a negative thing. So the first thing I would say in terms of preparing and planning, since we know it's coming, is to anticipate the feelings that might come along with it. Acknowledge that it's normal to experience strong emotions around these dates. Acknowledge that you may have a day where you feel sad, angry, or a mixture of emotions, not necessarily even one clear emotion. It may be a day where you feel really numb, and it's almost like you're not feeling at all. Maybe you're disassociating a little bit because of the anniversary date. So by anticipating these feelings, it can empower you to look ahead and be able to create a plan, which is the next step I want to talk about, for how you're going to deal with that day. So develop a plan for how you'll spend the day. It might involve spending time with loved ones or engaging in calming activities or seeking professional help. I want to make sure I have an appointment with my therapist that day, so I can have that kind of nurturing connection with somebody I know cares about me and can help me and can support me through that day. It might involve the person that hurt you, spending time with them that day. It might involve not spending time with them that day. Maybe you would rather them not be around, and that's okay. By being able to anticipate the feelings, and create a plan, you can customize that day based on what you need. And I think that's part of what's really important about being able to anticipate these anniversary dates. And then finally, let's talk about practicing self-care. So what are you going to do for yourself that day? How are you going to take care of your physical and mental needs leading up to the anniversary and on the day itself? And of course, I recognize it may not be just one day. It might be multiple days that we're talking about here. So maybe you found out on one day, but the next 2 or 3 days are almost a blur, and it was almost sort of a PTSD reaction the few days following that. So I do understand that we might not be talking about just a singular day here, but in some instances it might be, and being able to plan ahead for that particular day or series of days is what's most important. So preparing and planning, anticipate what you might be feeling, creating a plan, and then creating a plan for self-care is really important in being able to approach that anniversary date. So when that day does come, let's talk about coping mechanisms. Let's talk about how are we going to treat that particular day and help us get through it. Well, the first thing I would say is mindfulness and grounding techniques are really important. You're going to have enough anxiety approaching this date. And so being able to create some healthy coping that day, don't take a day and think, well, I'm going to pull out the bottle of wine and I'm going to sort of numb myself out. That's not healthy coping. We want healthy coping. So getting up, making your bed, having a plan of what you're going to do or try to accomplish that day is really important. If you love working in the yard, take a day off work and work in the yard if weather permits. If you want to be around some of your girlfriends or guy friends because it's good for your soul when you're around a certain number of people, then try to plan that. So we want to engage healthy coping mechanisms. We want to be able to limit the emotional fallout from these anniversary dates, the intense emotions that might come up and be distressful. And so we also want to certainly be able to seek support. Reach out to friends, as I mentioned, family, or support group on that particular day or series of days. But I think being able to create some healthy coping is one of the ways that we can best deal with these anticipated anniversary dates. And that's going to be really important. And that's going to be part of your plan, to be able to customize what do I want, what do I anticipate my needs are going to be on that date. I've had couples that want to spend the day alone, and they kind of go to their favorite stores and they just browse, and they just go and have a glass of wine with a good friend, or they go and play golf that day with a buddy. They just try to get through the day. And so part of their coping is to distract themselves. And that's okay. That can be a strategy. Now, like I said, I don't condone drugs or alcohol or something that's going to numb you out, but doing something healthy like playing golf or going out with friends or something, being with your buddies, that can be a very healthy, supportive thing to do as you anticipate these anniversary dates coming about. And then I'll also say that as we move further from the anniversary dates, part of the way we move through this is by lessening these emotional responses in three ways. We want them to be less intense, less frequent, and of less duration. And so that can also apply to triggers, places that might trigger us. If you know that your husband or wife met their affair partner at a particular restaurant, and every time you drive by that, you just see the inside, or you all of a sudden just go frozen, then what we want to be able to do is eventually to lessen the intensity of those reactions, lessen the frequency of them, and lessen the duration. So I think also, too, a good idea is to try to replace something negative that happened on that anniversary date with something positive. To give you an example, the following year on Thanksgiving, the year after my father had passed, we switched up the routine. We didn't do what we normally do. So we went out to eat instead of cooking at home. We tried to be around some other people than just our core family, because that was something certainly different than we usually did at Thanksgiving time. So we tried to do something different to replace something positive with something that had more of a negative connotation. And so by doing that, the year after that, the anniversary was less intense, it was less frequent, and the sadness did not last as long. Now, that could go for any feelings around those anniversary date or triggers. And again, I know I'm using those synonymously, but I do think of them as being separate. Anniversary trauma dates are something we can anticipate. Triggers are, to me, something that sort of just comes up on us we're not anticipating. But the emotional response around both those can be very similar. And that emotional response is really what I'm talking about when I say we need to lessen the intensity, the frequency, and the duration. When we get to that point where we can lessen those three things, then we start to move beyond those anniversary dates and the traumas that come up for us each and every year. People that I sit with, couples and individuals as well, sometimes they can speak about their trauma as something that has happened in the past. And when they do that, what they're able to communicate to me without even saying it in so much words is, I have moved beyond it being able to overwhelm me with an intense emotional response that is frequent and lasts a whole day or 2 days, or throws me into a funk for an entire week. When they talk about a trauma being in the past, if they're not intellectualizing it, mind you, I know some people can talk about it in terms of almost like it was an intellectual exercise where they're avoiding their feelings of it. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about couples and individuals that are able to still feel it, feel the sadness, feel the change in reality in their life, but are able to speak about it as something that was there and then, not something that is here and now. Remember, that's a big difference in treating trauma. Oftentimes, trauma takes a hold of us so that we re-experience it as if it was still happening. And part of the way we can move beyond it and anticipate these anniversary dates and know that we're moving in the right direction is when we can talk about something that happened there and then, not here and now. Something that really gripped us emotionally for a while in the past, but is no longer of the same intensity, frequency, or duration in the here and now for us. Listen, I hope you have found this helpful. I really, again, appreciate all of the feedback you're giving me about what you'd like to hear. Please keep that feedback coming. I love to hear from you guys. And until next time, we'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to Trauma Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.